Morning, everybody. Glad you're here today. It's a historic occasion for us in a lot of ways. This is an event that we are co-sponsoring with other partners in our firm. The Women of Womble is a group that is created within the organization to help us sponsor events like this. Kathy Hinger, who's my partner at our DC office, is the chair of Women of Womble, also known as WOW. And we also have an organization within Womble called WIN, Womble Inclusion Network. And our partner, Sid Chenoy, is in our Charlotte office. He's co-chair of that group. And our offices our other offices, except for Silicon Valley, it's a little early there, are all watching this. So say hello to the other Womble offices, and we're glad to have you join us. We also are going to be taping this and broadcasting this to our strategic partner, Bond Dickinson. And the reason this is a historic occasion is, Kathy? I don't know if you can see this or not, but on Tuesday, the partners of Bond Dickinson and the partners of Womble Carlyle decided to come together. The announcement is public today. It becomes effective October 1. We're very excited about it. It now provides us with opportunities to help clients in places that we weren't before. There are now 1,100 lawyers in 23 cities, 15 in the United States and 8 in the UK. So we're very excited about it, and thankful that you're the first group to see it. A couple of you knew about it, and somebody told me it's already on the wires, right, Zach? So you can read more about it there, and we look forward to sharing that information with you. The topic today is partly because the Women of Womble have been sponsoring speakers on a year-long basis, but last month, right, Kathy, May was Women's History Month. Okay, March. We're a little late. The reason we're a little late is partly because of our schedule and partly because of Dune's schedule, but this is a late celebration of that event. We're here today to talk about the topics of diversity and inclusion, and we have an expert. Yeah.
I don't know about that, but
yeah.
Someone who cares about it and working hard at it.
Very passionate, very strong advocate on these issues. I hope that some of you or all of you have seen the TED Talk. If you haven't seen it before, go back and look at it. Dune does a great job. I want to introduce her more formally, though. She's been a partner at Brown since 2012.
Just about 5 years now.
Yeah, which is about the time that we met.
Yeah.
And before that, she went to some, I don't know, mediocre institutions, Dartmouth and Harvard Business School. Go ahead, you can kick me. And before that, after that, she found her way to Brown Advisory. But one of the interesting parts of her career was working inside a law firm, or as being part of a law firm, which in Boston, law firms manage assets for clients in a way that we don't here. And I want to find out more about that. But among the other things that she's done in her career, she founded an organization called Investing in Girls, which we're going to talk about. And we're going to have a little fireside chat. I always feel like I need a guitar when I sit in this seat, but we're going to have a little fireside chat and take some questions after about 20 or 25 minutes. And for those that are in the other offices, if you have questions, please send them via email to Kathy, Hinger, CHINGER, at WCSR.com, and we may get some questions that come from other audiences.
Great.
So I think we're going to start with, what is it that we're talking about in defining our terms? And it seemed to me that in preparing for this and talking to Dune, that there's been an evolution in thinking around diversity and inclusion. And it's a much more broad concept for people like Dune and people who are thinking about these issues seriously.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for having me this morning. I just think it says a lot that there are conversations like this happening, and that this is how we move the needle, is coming together with a group of people to talk in a really open and authentic way about where there's good progress being made and where there are challenges. And I think it's wonderful that you not only are bringing colleagues together, but opening this up to clients and to other firms. And so give a lot of credit where it's due. And an exciting and historic day, so congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Congratulations. It's exciting, and feel lucky to be here for it. So I think the question you're starting with is a really good one. And I think specifically this shift we're seeing from the term that's been so commonly used around diversity to really, you see the language shifting towards inclusion. And this is a conversation that we've been having a lot internally within Brown Advisory around the way we sort of think about diversity is how you can measure. You can measure diversity. You can measure, there's a number of metrics that go along with it. Whereas inclusion is really the more qualitative. It's the comfort level. It's the empowerment that you're giving a wide range of people within the firm to bring their best selves to the conversation and make a difference within the firm. It's much harder to measure inclusion, but we see inclusion as the part of this conversation that's really sort of enabling the positive change to happen. Just creating the diversity metrics doesn't actually necessarily get you to the goal, which is having conversations that are including different perspectives, different approaches, frankly, bringing those together to make better business decisions and to improve the businesses that you're working at or the communities that you're engaged in and part of. And in the TED Talk, one of the points of it was, what is the end goal? And the end goal is really to create better businesses, better organizations. The end goal isn't just to have more diverse metrics. It's what you do with them that matters. And so I think that's the importance of the inclusion conversation. That is just wonderful to see. You sort of see it really shifting towards the importance of inclusion, which I think is great.
When we talked yesterday, some of the leading companies in the United States, Apple, Pepsi, BASF, have changed titles from Chief Diversity Officer to Chief Inclusion Officer, and that sort of reflects what we're talking about here.
I think that's right, and I also think there's there's a lot of the sort of easy metrics to track, whether it's gender or whether it's race, whether it's religion. But inclusion is really about the power of different perspectives. And each of us, if I'm sitting in a room with 4 white women, we all have very different perspectives we can bring to the table, and recognizing that it's about pulling those out. So I think inclusion really helps you encompass that.
How does the talent management and hiring and recruiting piece fit into the inclusion efforts?
It's a good question, and I think no one has the answer on this yet.
No, you do.
No one has the answer on this yet. We're working really hard at it. I think one of the things we see at Brown Advisory is that when we look at our hiring and sort of where so the majority of our new colleagues come from, a big part of it is from our networks. That one of our most successful recruiting tools have been our networks. But when you're a firm that is still not where we want to be in terms of our diversity metrics, our networks tend to look a lot like us. And so how do we sort of move to that next level and not kind of leave our networks behind, because those are a really important part, but complement them, right, with new channels, new avenues, new ways of bringing different perspective, more diversity to our recruiting network. So we're working on this. There are conversations we're actively involved in. I think we're doing great in some areas, and I think if you look at our equity research team, you look at our private equity and venture team, we've done some really great work and have done a good job in terms of getting to where we want to be, not only in terms of the diversity metrics, but in terms of the conversations that we're having across the teams. And there are other areas of the firm that we still have a lot of work to do. So I think the recruiting piece, it has to be conscious. I don't think we're going to get there without really consciously putting it on the table and saying that there are goals we want to meet. I think one of the other pieces that really struck me is I'm constantly trying to just read as much as I can to be exposed to as many conversations as I can around these topics. And recently was at a wonderful event that was hosted at Harvard Business School. And the dean there has done a lot to really focus on diversity and inclusion, and brought a number of professors into that sort of work with them. And they've done a good job of putting some of the data together. But Frances Frye, who's one of my favorite professors at Harvard right now, she's just wonderful. I strongly encourage you to Google her and look up some of the work she's doing. But she shows a great, do you mind if I use this whiteboard for a second? She has a great framework that she uses that sort of stuck with me a lot around this. But if you look at sort of just the typical 4 quadrants, and on one side you look at high standards, and this is sort of relevant to recruiting. And on the other side you look at deep devotion, which I'll explain in a minute. She's saying so often when you focus on diversity, you end up dropping, you get so devoted to the topic of diversity, you end up dropping your standards around the colleagues that you're hiring. And you see that this, in the short term, may increase the metrics, but it doesn't help you really create the inclusion that you want in terms of the conversations that are happening. So she talks about just really the importance of keeping standards really high, but really staying committed to your devotion. I think a great example she gives is with your kids. we often tend to sort of be here with our kids. We're so deeply devoted to our children that when they don't want to eat their broccoli or they don't want to clean their room, we lower the standards because we're so deeply devoted. And long term, that doesn't help set the right kind of long-term patterns and tone. And I think you see this often happening around some of the recruitment efforts. And I think this is where, as a business community, we have to figure out how to do this really well, because I think we can, but we have to be committed to both the devotion to diversity and inclusion and also the standards staying really high.
And you've talked about the go slow or go hard and fast approach.
Right. You know, that's, I think we know this is hard, and I hope others will chime in as well, because there's a lot of other expertise in the room here. But I think what we know is that this isn't easy, right? That if it were easy, we would have solved this years ago. I mean, the fact that 70% of valedictorians are girls and only 4% of S&P 500 CEO are women, I mean, that's a huge divide. We're not where we need to be. It's not to say that 70% of S&P 500 CEOs should be women, but it shouldn't be 4. You know, we should be a lot further along, and that's around gender, and you can look at similar metrics across race or across religion. So we're not where we need to be. This is a hard problem, or it would have been solved years ago. But I do think what's interesting is often when a problem's hard, we immediately go to, it's just going to take time. I mean, my feeling on this right now is we've given it a lot of time. And we're at a place where we need to not just say it's going to take time and we're okay with it taking time. I think this is conscious. I mean, a lot of these challenges are this concept of sort of the unconscious biases that we have. And the way we get over those is by putting them on the table and talking about them. So I think there's an extent, and this actually came, Frances Fry had a similar conversation with her about this at this event I was recently at. But her approach and Harvard Business School's approach has been that you have to go strong and hard at this. That you can't just say because it's hard, we're going to take our time and give it more time. And what they found, which I thought was interesting, is that when you have really complicated challenges like this, you tend to have 10% that are deeply committed to it. You have 10% that are skeptical. But most fall in this 80%, which is we care about it, we know it's the right thing to do, but we're not quite sure how to get our arms around making a difference. And her point is that when you go long and slow on something, that 80%, it's sort of easy for them to waffle, right, and not really commit one way or the other. But when you go at something really clearly and strongly, that it really helps that 80% move in the right direction. And it's that movement that makes a difference. And I think, you know, in the industry, I think it's probably the same in law firms as in financial firms, that, you know, we are dominated by white privileged men, our industry. And I work with many amazing white privileged men, some of them who are here that I have to say are just love working with and are deeply committed to this cause. But it's that group that's going to be able to make the biggest difference in this. And if we can get that group to really embrace this and be a part of it and commit to having these hard conversations, I think that's actually the group that has the biggest impact to move this. So, you know, I think this is a good conversation to have about, like, how do you think about not just saying this is hard, so it's going to take a long time, but saying how can we make a meaningful commitment and try and really move kind of that 80% to where we want to be, because that 80% is what's going to move the needle.
So you've led these efforts within Brown Advisory, but you've thought about these on a larger scale. Let's try some areas where that might apply to this group, because we have a spectrum of people who are in smaller organizations, large organizations. Apple may have thousands of people devoted to these efforts, but we may have folks here who are in companies that are 30 people. Is there a way to right size or thinking about right sizing these efforts? And then compatible with that, are there industries that are more amenable to this or less amenable to this?
Right. Good questions. I don't have all the answers, but I do think, regardless of what size you are, there has to be a personal commitment. That the difference between focusing on diversity and inclusion to check the box and focusing on diversity and inclusion to really make a difference in your company, you feel it as a colleague. I think there are a lot of firms that are doing it because it's what firms should be doing right now. And then there are others that are doing it because there's an authenticity and sincerity around, we really know this is going to make us better. I mean, I think if you look at industries, both financial services and law firms, I mean, we're human capital businesses. We're as good as the quality of the talent that we're attracting and retaining. We're human capital. And if you look at just those statistics of 70% of valedictorians being girls and 4% of CEOs being women, we're missing out on a major talent pool when only 4% of the top students graduating from high school are staying engaged in the industry. And it's not just around gender. There's similar metrics when you look at other minority groups. And so, that's where I think you have to look at it from the business side and say, our goal of good businesses is to attract and retain the best people. Mm-hmm. And if we're not creating inclusive environments, we're not going to be able to both attract and retain those top people. So I think the piece, regardless of the size of the firm, is there needs to be a personal and authentic commitment to it. That I think in some ways the kind of most is not. You're sort of checking the box and it's not really authentic because it doesn't create the space where those hard conversations can happen and conversations that will move the needle.
So let's keep talking about the business part of it. There are skeptics who say, bottom line, how's this affect our bottom line?
Yeah.
Let's talk about productivity and bottom line and happiness and things like that.
Oh, well, I mean, there's clearly a lot of data, and there's a number of reports. Credit Suisse, I think it was, did a great report that actually showed companies that had more diversity on boards and in senior leadership actually had better financial results. And there's, a number of different studies that show that. And then there's also skeptics that argue that it's, clearly it's not the diversity or that is driving it. It's other factors, and diversity is the kind of what ends up resulting from companies that have strong financial returns. So I think you can argue both sides on that. But I do think that taking the long-term view is really important when you look at the kind of the marriage of the financial impact, in these topics, that you can't look at it from a short-term perspective. I mean, I think a great example is when you look at maternity and paternity leave policies, right? When you just look at the short term, I mean, it's really difficult to justify extending maternity leave or extending maternity leave or adding paternity leave. The numbers just don't add up, right? When someone is taking more time away from the office, it hurts the short-term financials for that business. I don't think there's really any way to look at it in the short term differently. But in the long term, if we can figure out better ways to support parents during childbearing years, we're not going to get to where we want to be in the long term because women are opting out. Parents are opting out. I mean, I think it's more, you see it more clearly with women, but it's happening with men as well. That we have to create environments that retain top talent during those difficult years so that 20, 30 years down the line, these employees are still engaged, still on leadership track roles, and are making a difference in the leadership of our companies and on our boards. So you have to extend that time horizon, and that's when the financial results play out. So it ends up being extending maternity leave. When we looked at the math, it's like 2% of somebody's career. And that's a really small piece to end up with a diverse leadership group 20 or 30 years down the line. But in the moment, you don't feel like the numbers add up. So I think you really do have to extend that time horizon.
Mm-hmm. And how about the inclusion effort and effect on productivity and retention?
I mean, I see that as where both short and long term, it makes such a difference. I saw some really interesting data recently that profiled a group of students in terms of their happiness level at the institution. And they looked at men, women, men of color, women of color, the LGBTQ community. They looked at the socioeconomic differences. They looked at all these different factors. And they surveyed what the happiness level was. And I want to say it was somewhere between 65 to 75% happiness, sort of pretty consistently. Some were 60, some were as high as 8. But for the most part, it was sort of in that band. They then really focused on diversity and inclusion within the community in a 3-year span. So this is not a 10-year, they went quick and fast at it. And they came back and applied the same survey 3 years later, and every single group jumped up by 10%. So happiness on every group, happiness from African-American women to white men, all increased because of the work done around diversity and inclusion. And so I think that's such a great example when you look at that data to say, this helps everybody. and that you want to be part of a community that's listening to others, that's including a wider range, and please, speak up if any of you disagree, but I really think we can't look at diversity and inclusion work as helping minority groups only. I mean, this is helping the whole firm, and I think I'd be the first to say, although I'm not a white man, I would say white men want to work in environments that have that culture and I think it brings out the best qualities in that group as well, and that's what this data showed. So I think in the short term you can really see a difference, I think, in the productivity and the happiness, in the collaboration and partnership when you're in an environment that you really feel is inclusive and enables each colleague's best self to come to the table.
All right, so this is a little bit like asking a best-selling author what's happened since you wrote your book, since your TED Talk. What's happened and what have you learned and what have you been doing since then as a result of the TED Talk?
It was such an amazing learning experience. I mean, I just can't say enough about doing a talk in that format where you have 15 to 18 minutes to talk about something you care about. And it forces you to really get clear about what is it that you want to say that can make a difference. So I just encourage, whether you do it for yourself or a small group of friends, just the exercise of doing that really pushes your learning so much. So I just feel so honored that I was given this opportunity and learned a lot from it. But what has sort of really pushed me since the talk is just the importance of continued learning. That I've spent the 20 years in my career devoted to supporting women and girls, and particularly in financial services and around financial empowerment. And I still have so much to learn. This is a journey, and the learning never stops. And so it's been so wonderful through the TED Talk, just the number of people who have reached out and the opportunities like this to just be engaged in continued conversation. So my learning is still really continuing. But it's really pushed me to just keep seeking out what are the books that, I'm constantly asking, what are books that I should be reading? What are articles that are great out there that will kind of help continue my learning? And some of the resources that I've just come across since the TED Talk that I found just wonderful is there's a book, Whispering Vivaldi, that I just found it's sort of a must read and has incredible data around the impact of identity threats and stereotypes. And there's just a lot of aha moments in the book that I think use data to support the impact on diversity, inclusion, identity threats on performance. And it really shows that when you are a minority, your performance is impacted, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And I think it's important for just all of us to recognize and to be thinking about as we're sitting in meetings and we're working in different groups. I also went through a really incredible exercise with a high school that I'm a trustee at recently, and we did an exercise called a privilege walk. And it's a really powerful experience, and don't need to go into any of the details, but there's some wonderful tools and resources that are out there that I think we all should just be continuing to expose us to. But my thinking is definitely continuing to evolve. I'm learning a lot.
You have your own website yet? You need to.
I don't know about,
blog post?
I do think, you're sweet to say that, but I think what I'm really sensitive about, or I think a lot about, is this takes a team and a community, that one person cannot move the needle on this. And I look to so many of my wonderful colleagues at Brown who are here, and I think hopefully you'll all agree with me on this, that the needle moves when we work together. That not one person can change this. And I think that's the power of this, that we each individual, wherever you sit, whatever level you are within the firm, you have the ability to connect with someone and ask them how they feel about this topic. You have the ability in a meeting to ask a minority who's sitting in that meeting with you, what do you think? You have the ability to mentor and to build a relationship with someone. And each of those little acts of reaching out and connecting are what come together to make a difference in a firm. And so I do really feel fortunate to be, we're not perfect, at all. We have a lot we're still learning, but fundamentally to be at a place where I know people care and we really want to work on this together, I think is so important. So I know that Womble is the same way, and I think we all have to be fortunate to find communities like that where we know we're not perfect, but we're going to work on it together.
Ask you a particular question about the TED Talk, the SCurve.
Yeah.
Can you draw and explain it again?
Yeah, I'm happy to. and I don't know how many people got a chance to see it, but I'm a big fan of frameworks. I don't know whether or not others are, but I just find I'm a very visual person, and I find it really helpful. But one of the things that really struck me as I was sort of trying to get my head around, like, what can really move the needle around this, is that in so many, if you think about kind of a business S-curve, it's sort of the concept that as you start anything new, it takes a while for kind of it to gain momentum. It's hard in the beginning. Traction usually takes some time. But then you kind of hit an escalation point, and things, the dots connect. You hit that tipping point, and something will really take off. But then when you hit a certain level of scale, you often see something plateau. And like Apple is such a great example, right? You look at the iPod, and they started off slow, took off, and then sort of started to plateau. And that's when they jumped down to create iPhones, right? And then they jumped down to create iPads, and that you need to sort of be conscious that there are cycles to different, to different businesses and different business cycles. But I think the really key piece is that it gets harder before it gets easier. That when you make a jump, you usually have to take a step backwards before you can take a step forward. And so I feel like this is so relevant in this conversation around diversity and inclusion, because I sort of think about the first S-curve was the male-dominated S-curve, which is when businesses were dominated by white men. And and we sort of hit a point where businesses started to plateau. And then we moved down, particularly in the early 1900s, you see a lot more women entered the workforce. Some of it had to do with the Industrial Revolution, some of it had to do with the two wars that were back to back. But women started to get more engaged. But I think of the second S-curve as the male-dominated S-curve. Women were in the workforce, but were we really unlocking their full potential as leaders and their ability to not just be part of the workforce, but have a leadership role in the workforce? And so I think now we're in this place here of really moving to this third S-curve, which you'd say is the inclusive S-curve, where women aren't just part of the business, the different businesses, but we're really influencing and changing the culture and bringing a more inclusive and different set of perspectives to the table. And you can say this around gender, but you can also apply it to other minorities. But I think a really important piece of this is that you do have to take a step back before you take a step forward. And I know, Stephanie, we were talking about this morning, that there are hard conversations in this. It's not easy. And I think we all have to open up and be willing to be a little more vulnerable in this, and to say, we're not going to say everything right, we're not going to do everything right, but we have to be willing to get there and to take this leap. And we're all going to have some missteps. I know I have many, but if we don't try, we're not going to get to the next S-curve. So I think it's really a willingness to know that we may take a step back. Things may get harder before they get easier. There might be some tough meetings in there, but know that it's going to get you to the right place. So I think I oftentimes come back to this in my head, and so when there's been a hard conversation or kind of a hard moment of tension, it sort of says, we're on the right path. If it's hard, it means we're having the right conversations.
Let's keep going with that for a second. Let's talk about an institutional setback and how an institution has reacted to it. And I don't mean your organization necessarily. Yeah. You've been looking at this as a conceptual matter. And as we talked at the beginning, this is an evolution. So talk about, a setback that has become a template for learning and moving on.
Yeah. I think there's this one that we talked about last.
Sorry, I did this to you. We didn't prep for this one. I'm sorry.
But let me, because I think there's some good data behind this. And at Harvard Business School, they went back and looked at data for the 40-ish years that they've had women there at the school, and I could have the number of years a little off, but basically from the very beginning of when they started accepting women to today, women have been half as likely to be in the top 10% of the class and twice as likely to be in the bottom 10% of the class. So consistently, women's grades were lower than men's grades. And they talk all about how the class is almost 50% women and what great work they're doing. The reality is women were not doing as well at Harvard Business School as they should be. And they went and looked at the data, and they the first assumption was, well, women just must not be as prepared when they come. And so they went back and looked at it. And in fact, women's scores were just as high when they came in. Women's prior work experience was just as strong, if not slightly better. Their references, and when we looked at the data, women were just as competent and ready when they came to business school. So then the next assumption is, well, women just aren't speaking up enough in class, because a big part of grading is your comments and your engagement in the classroom. And they went back and looked at that. And they looked at teachers' notes, and in fact, they found women were not talking as much in class. What I give the school credit for is they didn't stop there. They said, is it really that women aren't talking as much, or is it that faculty members aren't remembering when women speak? And what took it to the next level, and they had a scribe sit in the classroom, not commenting on whether the comments were good or not good comments, but just noting who spoke. And in fact, women were speaking just as much as men. Both male and female faculty were not remembering when women spoke. And they started putting scribes in the classroom. Within a year, grades equalized. I mean, that's incredible, right? That was talk about being able to make change quickly. And this is an example of an institution that cares a lot about this, yet wasn't doing a good job. Mm-hmm. And looked deep and made what was a relatively simple change that has made a huge difference. And the impact now of the confidence it has when just as many women are Baker Scholars as men, which is that top 10% group, it changes the energy.
Yeah. Before we take some questions, let's get to a level of sort of a practical application here. Somebody here is going to go back and get on the elevator with his or her CEO and say, I just heard this great talk by Dune Thorne, and here's what she said. And they have 20 seconds before they get to the 30th floor. Mm-hmm. How do we fill in the blank?
Oh, it's a good one. I mean, I think the most important in that 30 seconds is to say, I think there's a real opportunity for us to make a difference by being thoughtful about this. And that we don't have all the answers, but that you want to engage them in a conversation. It's not going to be 30 seconds. But I would say if I had 30 seconds with someone, my 30 seconds would be spent that I think it is really, really important to have these conversations within companies to be able to attract and retain the best talent. Almost any CEO or any leadership team is focused on the ability to attract and retain the top talent. And so I think really focusing on that piece is the best way to get attention, because we're also in an environment where unemployment is really low. We are really in a competitive environment for talent today. And so I think this is the kind of the right moment to really engage in that conversation. So I would start there. But I think the other piece that I would talk about is doing it the right way, not just checking the box. That you see it, you really see it in companies that are hosting conversations like this, where coming in, I mean, you said everything's on the table, like be honest, be open, we want to have an engaged, that's really different than a lot of situations where companies are just sort of trying to tout the progress they're making. And I think we have to really do it in the right place. And the biggest part of it is the openness to being educated and increasing awareness, that for the most part, the intent is there. There are not many environments today that I feel like I'm in where people don't want to make a difference around this. It's not about intention. It's about not knowing how to go about it. And so what we really have to do is increase awareness, increase education, help those with great intent. And Dana, I'm looking, had a great, sent a wonderful article recently that talked about how we're fish swimming in the water, which is when you're a fish in the water, you don't see the water. You're not aware of the water. It's what you've always lived in. And that's how so many of us are in our business environment. Just, this is what we know. This is the way it's always been. But when you're not a fish and you jump in the water, it is really hard. It doesn't come naturally. And so when you've grown up as a fish and you've been a fish, you're not conscious of how hard it is for others. And what we have to do is help the fish see the water. So a big part of this is education. So I think that's a great, couple minutes you can explain that, and to really kind of commit leadership teams to say, like, at a minimum, let's increase the awareness, increase the education. Let's make sure we can see the water.
That's great. Slow elevator, but...
Slow elevator. Sorry. Hopefully it's a tall building.
Great answer. All right, let's take some questions. Who's first? Stacy.
Can you give a few specific examples of things that you've implemented within your organization that have worked, and then also that have not?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I could talk about this all day. So, well, I think one of the things that's worked is really encouraging people to have personal conversations. And this is something we're sort of pretty new at embarking on. But my sense from the early signs is that it's making a difference, is really encouraging people within the firm to ask each other, what does it feel like to be a woman working here? What does it feel like to be an African American working here? What does it feel like to be someone who grew up in a different part of the world that is here working at this firm? And again, I think you can often have this awkwardness of like, how do I ask that? But we have to start doing it and having those conversations. And I think the one-to-one personal conversations really make a difference. So I think that's an easy thing that I don't think there's any reason why every company can't be encouraging colleagues to have those conversations with each other, just to sort of increase the awareness and education. Because the personal stories, when someone can really open up and share a personal story about moments that have been really hard for them, it really hits you. When someone you care about, when a colleague you have respect for, that you want to succeed, shares a moment where they were really put down or really hurt by a situation, you connect on a level that you don't let that go. It really sticks with you. So I think that's one piece that is, I think, pretty easy to implement and important to do. I think one of the other things we're doing now is we're doing a beta or a pilot on trying to create some of the flexible work hour pieces, particularly kind of in these years with young children, for parents, and and we don't have all the data from it yet. It's not easy to do and easy to do well, but we have to figure out ways to support parents of young children. It just, in the work environment we're in now, where people are working such long hours and working so hard, and we have a culture that we love that has a very strong work ethic, and we don't want to let that go. I mean, people at Brown Advisory work really hard. It's part of our DNA. We don't want that to change. But we need to figure out how we can keep that sort of intensity of our passion for what we do, but also find ways to not lose people in those years. So that's something that we're working on, and I think I'm seeing more and more firms work on that as well. And I think as a business community, we really need to, I think some cases that haven't worked is, and we've done this at Brown Advisory and in other settings I've been in, is when you bring together minority groups to just try and move the needle on their own. If we brought together a group of women to say, women, we're going to get together and talk about how we need to move the needle for women, and it's the women trying to do it on their, that doesn't have the right partnership and collaboration to it. And I think it's something that's so important that, frankly, it's again, going back to sort of white privileged men that probably have the best impact in moving the needle. And I say that to so many of you who are here, that I love that this room has so many men, and we need to engage across different groups of people within a firm to really make a difference. So those cases I see rarely work. So I think that's one piece not to do. And I'd say there's some great resources around consulting, around firms that really have expertise at this, but you don't want to engage them until you're ready. Right, that I think you also see, it's like the first answer is, oh, we're going to bring in this consultant and they're going to solve this issue for us. A consultant can't solve the issue. A consultant can help give you some helpful tools and guidance, but you have to be ready to hear it, and you have to be ready to implement it. So I also see that's something that can I think often be a bump along the way that doesn't end up making as much progress as you want.
Kathy, you have a question from somebody at a different office?
Yes, this is a question from one of the other offices. What are some of the environmental factors that have to be present for a hard conversation to be possible?
That is such a good question.
Let me repeat the question just in case. What are the environmental factors that have to be present in order to make progress on these issues?
Yeah. Thank you for the person who asked that question. I think it's a great question, and this has actually been at the heart of what we've been talking a lot about internally. And I think the most important piece is there has to be a very deep commitment to listening and learning together. That as soon as you can't have an open conversation and share something that's been hurtful to you or that has affected you, if you don't feel like the other person on the other side is going to really listen, If you feel like they're going to be defensive, if you feel like it's going to hurt your impact, your ability to get that promotion next year or 2 years down the line, you're not going to speak up about it. So I think the number one piece is to commit as a firm to be open-minded and to encourage these conversations. And no matter how hard it is, the person on the other side, you can't be defensive. You can't talk about the 5 or 6 reasons why that wasn't what you meant and that wasn't your intention, and because that's not the right response. The right response is, thank you for sharing this. It is, when someone shares something hard with you, I mean, that's an honor for you to hear that. It took a lot for them to share it. And your response has to be, thank you for sharing that. You sharing that is going to help us move forward. And to really encourage that to happen more. So I think our first reaction, because we all care a lot, is to be defensive and to list all the reasons why it wasn't what you meant. But that's not the response that really helps. The response is thanking someone for sharing it, really listening, asking, what can we do to change that in the future? How can we use this situation to learn? How can we use it to increase awareness with others? That I think that tone is as important as what's actually said.
World Trade Center Institute, and I actually curate a women's conference. So hearing you speak is really awesome. And I've actually shared your talk with many colleagues that I've been putting into the conference. And one of the topics that you talked about is that the parallel between women on maternity leave and military leave. Mm-hmm. And that parallel to me is brilliant. And I've shared it with some global actually HROs, and they're like, yeah, I'd never really thought of it that way. Has there been any qualitative or quantitative research that's kind of supported the notion that those leadership skills that we bring when we come back from maternity leave, and I did this well before there was any Family Act, that there's really a lot of benefits that we bring to the table?
You know, it's such a good point, and I don't have the data. I'm pretty sure it's going to be out there, and I think it's good. Again, we're all continuing to learn, so I will seek that out but from a very personal level, as a mother of 3 children, I mean, I know being a mother and being a parent and being in partnership with my husband and raising these children, it makes me better at my job. I mean, the empathy, the patience, the ability to listen, like, there's no question it makes me better. And I see, I mean, from my experience working with colleagues that have been in the military, it's amazing what they bring to the table. The leadership, I mean, the leadership and the management skills are just, it's so impressive. And I think, you know, I think there are a lot of important parallels. And I also think what ties to that point is the ability to look at your career as a lattice or a matrix versus a ladder. If you think about careers as always just moving up, I think you're missing out on such an important dimension, which is horizontal movement, right? That the horizontal is what gives us perspective. When you're just on one path, up or back, you miss out on that perspective. And I think companies need to find better ways to help move people horizontally, to try working in a different division that might have kind of ability to have hours that are more suitable to where you are in your life for a period, and know that that experience will actually help you as you move back onto a different path later on. So I think I've seen it in a very personal level, and I think getting the data is a great point.
And putting it on your blog post.
You're not going to let this go, are you?
Other questions? 1 or 2 more?
On the question about environment, yeah. I work in the commercial real estate industry, and the word workplace strategy used to be a buzzword, and now it's something that's integral in every real estate decision, because what it does is it fosters an environment where the collaboration and the discussions that you talked about can be implemented, and it really turns, you know, individuals into a community within that office space. When I first started in business many years ago, you know, it was one office next to another on down the line, but we're really seeing corporate America, you know, really embrace this concept of how can we get people talking, how can we promote collaboration. So I think that's another thing that's helping to promote, you know, the what we're trying to accomplish.
It's a really good point. Space and place matter. They really do. I mean, we've done a whole overhaul of our working space, and many fewer offices, a lot more collaboration space. You're right. It really has made a difference. I think it's a good point.
Any others? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Meg Stoltzfus, and I work at Johns Hopkins. And part of my
Sure. My name is Meg Stoltzfus, and I work at Johns Hopkins, and part of my role spans from supporting our breastfeeding employees through supporting our employees who caregive for aging parents. And I think there's a lot of parallels and ways to mesh those kinds of caregiving roles as many people are leaving the workforce later, and mostly women in both cases, not to care for children, but to care for their aging parents. I find I've been able to help develop a lot of empathy with managers who are in that position because they understand what it's like to have a caregiving situation with their parents or grandparents, and they're able to develop more empathy for some of the younger employees who are struggling with caring for children. So there's felt like there's a lot of opportunity there to develop that empathy.
I think it's a really good point, and we're seeing it more and more. And those are the moments, the hard moments in employees' lives are real opportunities to build a long-term partnership with that employee. Because when you're there as a company to help an employee through that period, they're there for you on the other side. And we've seen they don't forget it. I mean, I know I personally had that during a period when I had 3 children within 5 years, and I was there, and I've seen it with colleagues as well. So I think, again, we have to increase that long-term view, right, and look at it as how do we use this as an opportunity to build a long-term partnership with this employee and colleague.
Great. Can we give a round of applause to Dune for this?
Thank you. Thanks for the good question.
To all of our Womble colleagues and friends and clients, thank you for joining us. To our friends at Bond Dickinson, we look forward to being partners with you and working with you. And we have a little gift for you.
Oh, thank you, David.
You can open it or not, as the case may be.
Really sweet of you. You didn't have to do that. Well, it's an exciting day for your firm today, and let's see if I can get this open. Is this a test to see?
Takes a village.
Yeah, I might need a little, want to give me a hand here? Make sure I don't drop it.
I got the paper.
You got the paper. I got the... Oh, lovely.
That is a piece by Robert McClintock, who's a famous Baltimore artist, little piece about
Oh,
Fells
I love
Point.
it. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.